I'm gonna make bracelets so we know who we can trust.
If you know, you know. It is the crystal for power and protection, which I figure we could use a little bit of right now.
Guys, my standards for TikTok are on the absolute floor, but they somehow keep hitting a new low. We're going to break down the latest painfully obnoxious TikTok trend and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across our politics, across our media, and across the internet, all from an independent perspective. First, like I mentioned, we've got to do a deep dive into the latest liberal TikTok trend being promoted by white women who want to make clear that they are not evil, mean conservatives or Republicans, the blue bracelet movement. The short version is that a bunch of liberal white women came up with the idea that's now spread throughout TikTok and also caused a fair bit of controversy that they need to start wearing blue bracelets so that people around them, particularly people of color, know they're the good white people who voted for Kamala and that they are safe, whatever that means. It's hard to track this trend all the way back to its origin, but here's the first video I found mentioning this, which came from a woman who's connected to the Swiftie community, Taylor Swift fans, and a whole bunch of pro-Kamala followers, encouraging them all to wear blue bracelets to show that they are liberal and that they are a safe space. Take a listen.
Swifties, I'm buying as many blue beads and blue hearts as I can, and I'm gonna make bracelets so we know who we can trust. And if you need one, please comment or DM me and I'm gonna send you one, because this is real. It's just, I'm trying hard to keep it together today. So we're going to make friendship bracelets and we're gonna keep each other safe. Send this passes along. We gotta let them know this is what we're doing.
Wait, that was you keeping it together? I mean, she just seems really stable and well-adjusted. Like, oh no, not blue bracelets signaling that you voted for Kamala. I don't know how Trump will ever recover. This is just peak virtue signaling. It is the epitome of performative activism with no actual sacrifice of any kind, but just trying to signal that you're one of the good people with a meaningless gesture that most people won't even notice or understand. It's actually condescending and kind of offensive, falsely suggesting that Trump supporters are unsafe to be around, or that minorities who this is targeted at are so fragile that they need to be reassured that they're in a safe space, when in actuality, most of them are resilient adults who can handle sharing space with people who might disagree with them on some things. But while this trend was ridiculed on the right, a whole host of liberal women across the internet seemed to love this idea. One wrote in the comments, "I really would love one. I'm lost." To which the creator replied, "Sending you hugs and soon a bracelet, because we have to have faith we will survive this." Survive this? Really? Another person commented, and of course it's a pink hair person, "Blue ... I cried last night. Send me one." Another person wrote, "I need 3 so the right people know that my mom and dad are to be trusted as well. My dad is the right demographic for his voters, but he is not like that." Sorry, but I find this idea that you can trust people or not trust them based on how they vote incredibly toxic and inaccurate. There are good and bad people on both sides of the political aisle, and there are people who treat each other in the real world with kindness and empathy and respect from either political party, and there are people from either party who screw other people over and don't give a crap about anyone else. You just can't use politics as any sort of proxy for trustworthiness in business, in family, or in anything else. At least not with any degree of accuracy or seriousness. So you're literally encouraging people to make bad decisions about who they trust. What could possibly go wrong? But then again, maybe I'm wrong, because some of them are making the bracelets with crystals that offer protection or something.
If you know, you know. I like this particular one because it is made of lapis lazuli. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but that's the crystal. It is the crystal for power and protection, which I figure we could use a little bit of right now.
Well, I really have no rebuttal to this. I mean, if the blue bracelets are made of protective crystals, of course they'll be a powerful message and keep people safe. It's moments like this where I almost want to give up. Anyway, this whole trend just sticks out to me as obnoxious and dumb because it is yet more virtue signaling from woke people who seem desperate to signal that they're so good and so virtuous and they're not like the bad people, but they always seem dead set on doing it in ways that require no actual sacrifice or work of any kind on their end. Just like they put the yard signs out with the "no human being is illegal" sign while they live thousands of miles away from the border. Just like they put the "support teachers unions" sign out for their local public schools while they send their kids to expensive private schools. Just like they put "take climate action" signs in their front lawn, but they still drive SUVs and they still fly all around the world on vacations. We genuinely have an epidemic of virtue signaling in this country. And if we don't get it under control, I might actually lose my mind. This whole blue bracelet thing is also just so incredibly online that it's not going to work in reality. Most people are going to have no idea what this symbol is, never have heard of it, and a bunch of people are just going to be wearing blue bracelets, or really bracelets that happen to be blue, and you're going to think they're a lib for some reason because of a TikTok trend that a couple million woke people on the internet are aware of, but most real people aren't, and you're going to make false assumptions. Like, the whole thing is not actually going to translate from the internet to real life. But that's pretty par for the course for woke trends. And again, I have to object to this weaponization of safetyism, this implication that people are unsafe because of their bad ideas or words or beliefs. That's actually really dangerous because it conflates speech or thoughts with actual violence. And if you go too far down that path, you end up in the warped place where some of these woke people actually think violence is justified to prevent words or in response to words. You see this in polls where college kids, a huge percentage, will say, yeah, it's okay to use physical force to shut down a hateful speaker, or other frightening and authoritarian and violent beliefs held by supposedly progressive, open-minded people. That kind of thinking is totally unsustainable. And if it became widely adopted or was ever enshrined into law in any way, would rip our society apart. Yet you can see traces of that line of thought in even silly TikTok trends like this, when they talk about who is safe and who is not, simply as designated by beliefs, thoughts, and words, not by actual actions or physical danger. I will say, this trend, like so many other woke TikTok trends, ended up in the delicious, delicious situation where onlookers like me are just munching our popcorn because they got attacked for their trend actually being problematic, because you can never be woke enough for the woke people. Here's one TikTok explaining how harmful this trend was and how woke white women need to do better.
I'm about to crash out on y'all for real. Blue bracelets. Y'all are pathetic. Y'all really can't think for yourselves, because we told y'all to leave us alone, stay the out of our face, and stop asking us for shit. And when left here on devices for one day, for 24 hours, blue bracelets is what you came up with. Not buying black-owned brands, because you see, that's too niche. Other white people wouldn't recognize that you're wearing black-owned brands. And see, what you want is to be able to signal to other white people that you don't call black people slurs to their face. It's not about actually making us feel safe. It's not actually about wanting to support black people, because if you actually wanted to support black people, when you thought, what's the first thing that I could do to support black people, it'd be to put money in our pockets.
So it's so funny because this TikToker is like a crazy leftist. I just reacted to her insane takes the other day, but she's correct. I agree. The blue bracelet movement is literally about woke white people wanting to virtue signal to other woke white people, not actually about wanting to meaningfully help minorities or people of color in any way. And honestly, kudos to like the true leftist TikTok, because they actually seem to get this. Now, I'm sure their solutions and ideas for what should be done, some of them I would certainly disagree with, but I will at least give them points for their astute observations about the woke white liberals pushing this trend. Anyway, I just wanted to bring you guys this story and fill you in on this latest TikTok trend, partly because it's hilarious to me, but also because it so perfectly encapsulates everything that's wrong with the fringes of social progressivism in America today. But what do you think? Are you going to be buying a blue bracelet and hopping on this trend anytime soon? Please do let me know in the comments. Do hit that like button while you're at it. Make sure you're subscribed. And remember, guys, I do pick a few comments to read and respond to in every episode. And if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on tomorrow's show. And now we got to check in with the lovely ladies over at The View, because a recent episode of The View spiraled into chaos in a debate over education policy. They were discussing Trump's new education secretary nominee and her support for school vouchers, which essentially allow taxpayer money to follow students to the school of their parents' choice. So instead of just taxpayer money that's being allocated for your kid's education, just going to the public school by default, they get a voucher and it goes with them to a charter school, a private school, or a public school, and that's how the funding is allocated. It's part of the school choice movement. Well, one of the hosts of The View, Sunny Hostin, had very strong thoughts about this movement. Take a listen.
And what happens with vouchers, the studies show very clearly that they fund students who are already attending private schools. So people with money get those vouchers, use the vouchers to pay less for their private schools, and their kids go on to do well. Where do you get the money from vouchers? You pull those money from those poor schools, those poor schools. Let me just finish this. So wealthy families are overwhelmingly the recipients of school voucher tax credits. I'm not making this up. This has been studied. In 2020, a 2020 study found that only about half of states with voucher programs require teachers to have a bachelor's degree, require teachers to have training, require teachers to have licensing, require participating private schools.
If I may get in, just to make it a conversation.
But because I have children and because I looked at the private
I went
schools,
to public school. I believe you got to go to private school.
There is zero statistical significance.
You got to go to private school.
Because nobody can figure out what's being said here right now. No, there is no last thing right now. We're going to go to break, and then we're going to come back.
Yes.
Because you can't. What's happening is no one can hear anything anyone is saying. So everybody has to
on it so we can talk.
Well,
that
you know,
goes for you too, my dear.
that's
for a word, and she's been talking
we'll
for
be
3
right
minutes.
back.
Well, it looks like that segment got a little bit spicy, but I do love how Sunny cited all these studies about how these voucher programs are terrible and don't work, but didn't mention any of them or actually cite them, so we can't really fact check or verify them. But it's not true that school choice programs just benefit the wealthy, although everyone does get to participate, including well-off families. In fact, they really benefit people who aren't particularly rich the most. Because rich people already had school choice. They have enough money to, yes, pay the taxes that go to fund the local public school, but then pull their kid out and double pay for education and send them to a private school. Really rich people already have that choice. So school choice doesn't really expand or change their options. It just means that the tax money allocated for their kid's education will actually go to the school that's educating their kid, rather than the local public school that isn't educating their kid, which makes sense. Voucher programs very specifically enable those families who can't afford to double pay for education, who can't afford to pay private school tuition, to be able to send their kid to a charter or private school. And Sunny raises this concern that not all these programs completely require all these stringent things about the schools, but they leave it up to parents. That parents can pick a school that will suit their kids' needs and has good outcomes and good teachers. And I think the fundamental premise behind the school movement, school choice movement that I sign on to, is that parents know what's best for their kids better than government bureaucrats in some state capital. Parents, by and large, aren't going to pull their kids out of excellent public schools to put them in terrible, horribly run private schools with incompetent teachers. No, if the public schools are doing a good job, they'll leave their kids there. And if they're not, parents will know what's best. They're actually on the ground, they're familiar with their district and their situation, and they'll shop different school choice options, different private schools, and they'll pick the one that's best for their kid. I trust parents to make those decisions a lot more than I trust Sunny Hostin, who, as Alyssa Farah Griffin tried to point out, went to private schools because she's very wealthy, so she's always had that school choice. But many Americans do not, and that is what school choice programs are aimed at changing. Now let's hear what Alyssa Farah Griffin had to say after they came back from the break.
personally worked on the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program when I was working in Congress. And that program alone, which is a charter school system, it experienced a 21% increase in graduation rates. There are conflicting statistics, but according to Morning Consult, the majority of Americans support health savings account, vouchers, and the taxpayer money following the students. It is my belief, as somebody who grew up in the public school system, believes in it, and was grateful to be in a really good school district. If you're in a school that's falling behind and your parent wants to give you the opportunity to get a leg up, your tax dollars should follow you.
Question, but you're a school charter person, and this is part I don't understand. Doesn't it come down to less the result and more the choice of isn't the fight for the parents to say they choose it? Is that what most people are supporting?
It's simply that a parent should be able to make the best choice for their student. But I also think that there are schools that are falling behind. It doesn't mean they don't deserve education, but I don't think students should be victims of a falling behind school. Their life is at stake in it, their future, their earning potential.
But see, you went to a good school. I wasn't in a good school district. That's the inequity.
But where did you go to school?
In the South, I had to start school in the South Bronx projects. But
then didn't you get to go to a private school?
So this is exactly right. School choice programs have been implemented in places that are run by Democrats, like Washington, D.C. And that's not because they help the rich. It's because they specifically help often low-income minority students who are trapped in failing public schools and have no options. Now, I agree with Alyssa Farah-Griffin. Some public schools are great. I went to good public schools growing up in Massachusetts, and if there had been a school choice program, I might have just stayed put. I don't know that I would have left my school because it was fine. I got everything I needed there. But many students do not face that reality. They're trapped in schools that aren't setting them up for success, that aren't meeting their needs, and yes, parents should have a say, should have a choice, should have an option to send their kid to a different school. We shouldn't trap kids into broken systems and I know these people would say, well, we just don't fund them enough. A lot of these schools are very well funded. The U.S. spends far more per student on public education than most similar advanced nations. We've thrown money into many of these public school systems, and they haven't improved. Some are doing great, and those ones wouldn't really be defunded by school choice very much at all because people would choose to stay there. It's the failing schools that would lose money and potentially have to close down. And you know what? Maybe they should. When you have a monopoly on education and you just get all this money and all these students stuck in your school no matter what, and they can't leave no matter how bad a job your school is doing, that's not going to lead to good results. The total absence of competition or any sort of market forces. When there's actually competition, schools have to provide good services and have to meet families' needs at least more than they can than they will when they just have all the money and all the students by default because of local zoning and zip codes. That's just my take. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below. And were you surprised to see the ladies of The View wade into education policy? I didn't know it was up their alley, and I frankly wasn't super impressed with the quality of the discourse in their segment. But hey, it was interesting to watch, I guess. And now we got to check in on politics because over in California, something very strange just happened. Golden State voters actually rejected a radical progressive economic proposal. Take a listen to some coverage from Fox Business.
Californians have rejected Prop 32 by a very narrow margin. The measure would have raised the state's minimum wage to $18 per hour, making it the first state minimum wage increase to fail at the ballot in nearly 3 decades. But Joe Connie, he's the California Restaurant Association CEO. He says it's important that policymakers hear the message being sent by voters, stop using California consumers as guinea pigs for public policy experiments that make life more expensive for everyone.
Yeah, so you heard that correctly. California voters voted down a ballot initiative to raise the statewide minimum wage to $18 an hour. And it's kind of crazy that we're only finally getting this confirmation now, weeks after the election, because that's how long it takes California to count its votes. Like, I'm no expert on electoral systems, but we've got to be able to do it more effectively and more efficiently than that. That's absolutely wild. But on this specific issue, I'm surprised but happy to see California voters having some common sense. We all want hardworking people to earn more, and we all know that people are struggling to get ahead, but just hiking up minimum wage laws is not the way to do it. Wages go up naturally when there's competition and a hot labor market, labor is very in demand. And when workers are able to be more productive or gain experience or increase their skills, but just artificially setting the minimum wage higher doesn't create new jobs and doesn't create more productivity or value in employees. So all you're really doing is making it illegal for a business to employ somebody who can only produce $15 or $16 or $17 an hour in value for that company. Well, it would make sense for somebody to employ them at $14 an hour if they can produce $17 an hour of value for me at Target. But if the minimum wage is $18 and this entry-level employee, this 17-year-old, can only produce $14 an hour in value for me as an employee, I'm not going to employ them at a loss because of California minimum wage laws. I'm not going to employ them at all. I'm going to increase automation. I'm going to have my existing employees who are more productive work more hours. You're just going to price people out of the labor market. And to whatever extent they are forced to pony up and pay higher wages, we end up seeing those costs just passed along to consumers via higher prices. So the actual purchasing power, the real income that working class people have, doesn't necessarily go up just because you raise the minimum wage. If their wage is higher, the number on their paycheck is bigger, but the things they buy at the places they go to also become more expensive, they're not better off. But of course, raising the minimum wage is one of those things that sounds great. Like, why wouldn't you want people to earn more? And surely those greedy corporations can suck it up and just take it out of their profits. But if you're familiar with economics and how this stuff really works, that's not how it actually works out in practice. But most of the time when people are voting on these things, they don't know that. And they just go with kind of surface level emotions or what feels good or sounds right. So I'm honestly surprised to see California voters vote this down. It seems like the kind of thing they would approve. But maybe times are changing. Maybe they're finally realizing that progressive policies have made their state increasingly uninhabitable and unaffordable. And maybe they're finally waking up and going to try something different. What do you guys think? Would you have voted yes or no on this initiative? Let me know in the comments below. And now we'll wrap up today's show by reading a few of your comments from recent episodes. And boy, my episode yesterday on the congressional bathroom bill got some feedback, which, to be fair, is what I expected. One person writes, regarding female bathrooms, transgender women, those that have gone through sex change surgery, should be allowed in women's spaces. As you mentioned, some very much look the part. Non-binary, queer, transgenders that identify as a woman and do nothing or very little to pass should not be allowed. This would include all the bearded women with septum piercings, they, her pronouns, etc., etc. Yeah, I completely agree with you. The question becomes, how do we draw that line? And that's why we can't have self-ID. We can't have what Democrats and progressives propose, where anyone is just whatever gender or sex they feel like, and they can just change their paperwork with a signature. No. You should have to do what they used to do in Britain before they went all in on self-ID and have a medical diagnosis from a doctor and have lived as the other gender for several years, and then you can get some sort of formal recognition for rare, true transsexual people that allows them to go about their life and enter other spaces as needed without enabling bearded men who call themselves they, them to go into the women's room because they feel like it. But all of that requires a degree of nuance that I think is lost in this conversation. Another person writes, hey Brad, love your show and have followed you for a long time. I completely agree with you on all your stances on transgender issues you have discussed in the past, as well as your stance on bathrooms that you discussed today. Like you stated, there are many transgender individuals who can completely pass as the opposite sex. My question is this: how about people who say they identify as trans but really do not make much or any of an effort at all to pass as the opposite gender, or those who haven't started any transitioning yet? I've known such individuals like this who yet will still use the opposite sex restroom, so I'm curious of your opinion here. Do you feel like there should be some level of transitioning and or appearance change that needs to have been done, and if so, what? Looking forward to your thoughts. Well, thank you for the comment and thank you for the support. I agree completely. Those people do need to be excluded, and that's why we can't just have self-ID. We can't have whatever you feel like is whatever you can go into. But we also shouldn't be 100% strict. Your birth biological sex is the bathroom you must always go to, or you end up with the ridiculous situation where truly transsexual people who look like the opposite sex have to go in the opposite room. And that would make a lot of women uncomfortable to have bearded men with muscles, or people who appear as bearded men with muscles, in the bathroom with them. So we need some sort of a process where you need an actual diagnosis from a doctor, not just, oh, I woke up and I feel like a she that day. And you need to go under a certain level of medical transition. You need to hold it for a certain period of time, and then you can get some form of recognition or certificate that would enable you to use these spaces. But not just anyone can do it. There needs to be a stringent process. That's my position, at least. Another person wrote a super chat that simply says, a 10-paragraph essay. Well, that's the kind of 10-paragraph essay I will allow, so thank you very much. Another person writes, some time ago, I was in a store bathroom with my young daughter. When I left the stall, there was a man standing. When I pointed out this is the women's bathroom, he just smirked at me and said his pronouns are she, her. To which I said that if he doesn't leave now, my pronouns will be mama bear and I will perform a gender-affirming surgery then and now. Good for you, honestly, and that kind of cracks me up. The comment continues, he left. If he was a true trans woman, I would have no problem, but predators are cosplaying women for nefarious purposes and are not really trans. I'm so sorry to hear that that happened to you, and I agree that that's the problem. It's not actual trans women, it's men who will abuse the system and try to take advantage of women or be creeps. But there's got to be other ways we can crack down on that without excluding trans people who aren't like that. And I think in most cases, those men who are creeps and pervs are already comfortable with violating social norms and rules and regulations, so they might have gone in there and done that anyway. Another person writes, hi Brad, I want to raise some major concerns about the Make America Healthy Again movement. RFK feels like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Rather than focusing on education, access to whole food, and promoting exercise, the focus seems to be on regulating processed food, pushing an anti-vax narrative, and dismissing evidence from food scientists. Big food and big pharma are not the main source of America's health issues, rather poor diet and sedentary lifestyles are. The issue isn't that a lot of people are eating Doritos, it's that they also don't include fruits and veggies. Additionally, in a free country, you cannot force someone to have a healthy lifestyle. I'm really hoping some Republicans in Congress will notice and choose not to confirm RFK. Thank you for this comment, and I share some of your concerns, so stay tuned. I'm going to do a segment on RFK Jr. soon. Another person writes, the transgender issue is nuanced. Both Blair White and Alexis Blake have stated that they didn't go into the women's restroom until they passed very well. I recognize both of them as feminine, if not women. I would not be uncomfortable with either of them. And this is knowing that Blair White is actually biologically intact. That's no secret. She said it publicly. I don't know about Alexis, as she prefers to keep that private, which is fair. They didn't want to make women uncomfortable, and they didn't want to feel uncomfortable. From what I understand, there are family/neutral restrooms in the Capitol building. However, the respondent you showed, as well as others in the clock app space, give very masculine, patriarchy, misogynistic energy. No, I'm not a liberal, but I call a spade a spade. Passing privilege is a thing, but those that aren't striving to pass are usually not gender dysphoric, rather autogynephilic. They get off on making women uncomfortable rather than recognizing that they are a guest in women's spaces, as Alexis said. So, to make a long comment short, it's a gray area. I agree with you that it's a gray area, and I don't know exactly how we navigate the nuances of it, but I do know that blanket bans that prevent even legitimate, non-threatening trans people from using facilities aren't a solution, at least not in my opinion. And there are some family and neutral restrooms in the Capitol building. I've been there, but they aren't in all places. And there are places where there's just going to be a man's room and a women's room, and they'd be forced to choose or forced to go all the way back to their office or travel floors to get to a neutral bathroom. And yes, every member of Congress has their own private bathroom in their office, but staffers don't. And that's actually who this will primarily affect, not Nancy Mace or Sarah McBride. but their staff. Another person writes, it's interesting to see how people act like so-called marginalized people have so much to worry about in a second Trump presidency. So many people I know in those communities are not all that worried about it. Just like you said, a lot of them voted for Trump. I'm friends with a married gay couple who are pretty much like my drinking bros. One of them voted Trump and the other voted Harris. However, this was no secret between them, and it seemed no more contentious than a disagreement over whether pineapple goes on pizza. They hosted an election party with red and blue Jell-O shots to be taken when a state was called for Trump or for Harris. It felt more like a Super Bowl party vibe than an election watch party. I want to think this is how most people are, LOL. I think that's still the way that a lot of people are. I don't know about most. The Delulu is becoming widespread in this country, but I still think there's a lot of us who are more or less like that. They're just not the ones on TikTok or usually the ones making social media content in general. Another person writes, I have absolutely witnessed women in authority be harder on women than they are on men. It was part of my job when I supervised a clean room to advocate for staff with upper management, and it was always easier to make the case for men to my female operations manager than it was for women. She was great in a lot of ways, but she was absolutely ruthless in her standards for other women in the workplace. More than once, I really had to dig my heels in because she was totally applying a double standard. I even noticed that she would let things slide with me that she would immediately crack down on with the female supervisors. Yeah, I've heard something similar from a lot of female friends, and maybe it's because the older women who are in these senior positions had to go through so much, decades ago when they were entering the workforce and it was all men, that they have higher expectations for women, or they resent a little the fact that they have it easier now. I don't know, but it's a messy situation that I guess I'll leave to the ladies to figure out among themselves. Another person writes, I'll have to disagree with you to a point, Brad. That's okay. That's always allowed here. The comment continues, I understand if you're speaking for dudes like Blair White, who can actually pass as a woman, but unfortunately, transsexuals like Blair are hardly the case anymore. Now the trans argument has gotten out of control. It's not just about bathrooms, it's about women's spaces in general. Just for the sake of not wanting people to feel bad, society has become full of narcissistic virtue signalers. For example, in California, male convicts can identify as women at any moment and get into the women's prisons, and as a result, women have been sexually assaulted. Duh. As with bathrooms, any man, even autogonophiles for whom this is a fetish, can just say they're a woman and get accepted into women's spaces. As men, we just really don't care because we aren't threatened in the same way women are by men. I understand that actual transsexuals just want to live unbothered, but unfortunately, we've opened up this can of worms because we feel bad for them. I get where you're coming from, but I think it's about more than just feeling bad for them. It's also about wanting to avoid dysfunctional outcomes that would make women uncomfortable, like having trans men in women's spaces. But I agree with you. Prisons are a very different story than public restrooms with stalls and should be sex segregated. And to the extent that you have trans women, maybe they need a third ward, an LGBT ward or something of the sort, because trans women, I think, would be at a lot of risk of harm being put into a men's prison, but obviously we can't put biological males into female prisons. That is a recipe for disaster. So I just think we need to have nuance in all of these policies, but the far left sure doesn't. They've absolutely gone mad on these issues. Yet at the same time, some Republicans and conservatives are also thinking in a very black and white manner on this issue that just leaves no room for nuance whatsoever. All right, everybody, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go, and do comment with your thoughts. I love reading the comments, hearing what you all have to say, and I do pick some to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on tomorrow's show, but you've got to keep it brief, just a few sentences. I can't read 10-paragraph essays. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll talk again tomorrow.